shoot. Okay. I think we are live. So, let me get rid of that. And there we is. Or apparently there we are. Or there we were, because now we're somewhere else. Okay, good. All good. All good. Okay. Hello. Good evening. Good morning. Good afternoon, wherever you may happen to be in the world today. Nice to see you. I'm Tad. I'm going to be here today, tonight, this morning, wherever you're seeing it, whatever time of the day it is, and tomorrow. And then I'm going to be off for several weeks. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking tonight. I'm just going to jump in and start reading because I think I've got really about two very long reading sessions left. Um, so I don't want to wait too long. I may run a little past the top. I'm going to kind of go by the page numbers I have left on Brothers of the Wind. In the interim, not much to tell anyway. We're just in the midst of all the normal stuff. I am working on the rewrite of the last Ordinary Farm book, Deborah's and my all ages book, and planning some other things for what comes next and preparatory to whatever final work I have to do on Navigator's Children, although it's done really as far as I'm concerned. The only thing that comes now is the publication process, which includes some copy editing and stuff like that. But in the interim, I will be working on other things, but we'll also be traveling for a bit because, as I mentioned, we are leaving a week from tomorrow, and we're going to be gone for a couple of weeks. And of course, needless to say, the big dog has seen the suitcases, which came out yesterday, and he was moping around all day today. He does not like it. Johnny does not like anybody going away. And he does not like it, especially when I go away for long stretches. But there's nothing that can be done about it. We cannot take a dog with us. And so he must remain behind. But fortunately, he will be remaining behind with people who love him and his older, smaller brother, Walter, who at least is familiar. I don't know if what goes on between them is actually love. It's a very complicated dog relationship. And I have enough trouble trying to explain human relationships without trying to get into dog relationships. But they are complicated because Walter was here first, so he was the senior dog. Therefore, he was higher up the ladder. He was atop the hierarchy once we lost Frankie, once Frankie passed on, or any other euphemism you choose. And as a result, Walter has always had the top dog position, despite the fact that he weighs like 4 pounds. Well, maybe a bit more now, but like 4 pounds. He's tiny. Even for a Chihuahua, he's tiny. He's a skinny Chihuahua, long-legged and skinny. And Johnny weighs, somewhere between 70 and 80 pounds. And yet, Walter would discipline Johnny by literally jumping up and grabbing Johnny's jowl and hanging on it. And Johnny would just take it. Things have changed slightly over the years. Now Walter sticks his head into Johnny's food bowl and gets jumped. So Johnny is not as passive as he once was, but it's still a complicated relationship. Anything else to report? No, just the usual stuff of trying to work, trying to deal with all the other complications we have in life at the moment, many of which I have at least alluded to in various other readings. And then also trying to get ready for a trip. And because Deb in particular will be gone even longer than I am, or I will be, but we both have, we have to take a lot of stuff. And, it's when you get out the stuff and you start looking at things like your adapters or your electric shaver or whatever, and you start going, I don't know if that's going to make it through a trip, or God, I swear I had one. But, moving right in the middle of these things adds to the joy. So there's a lot of stuff I have no idea where it is now. I just literally couldn't even possibly guess. And I'm not going to tear the whole house apart to buy a new electric shaver or something. I mean, we're not that broke. Thank God. Um, so anyway, so that's basically it. I don't have a whole lot I wanted to say, and I do want to jump into the reading and get as much done as possible tonight so I'll know what I have left for tomorrow and if we can finish the book. So I am very quickly going to jump into that. Let me just see who might have showed up at this point. Since we're early on in the broadcast. I see James. Hello, James, my friend. Good to see you. Suzanne, good to see you. There is my mother-in-law, Hazel. Hello, sweetie. Good to see you. Your daughter is fine. Chris, who just told me that we just had our 300th reading broadcast up on YouTube. 300. Good Lord. That's terrifying. Maria Jose. Hello. Good to see you. Rosalba. Wouter. Julian. Hello, good to see you too. Dirk, a pleasure. Iris, Nicole, Raziel or Raziel, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, but I'd be happy to know, so please let me know. Mark, good to see you, Mark, as always. Penny, you too. And Carol, good to see you. And Christy, and I'm sure there are a few others, but those are the ones that I have access to at the moment. Sandra. Sandra just popped in and said that she's just come back from 10 days in Cornwall and Devon. Lovely. Well, I won't probably make it down to Devon this trip, but Deb is going to go visit a dear school friend of hers in Devon. And that actually, Devon is where our daughter is named Devon, and that's where her name came from for a variety of reasons, but it's a place we both like. And it's also just a name that we liked. And at the time, it wasn't a very common name. I don't think it's super common now for girls, but, it was pretty uncommon back then. Anyway, okay, so I have babbled, and now I'm going to actually start reading because, as I said, I want to try and get as much as possible. Quickly bringing you up to date. Pamon Kes, our narrator, who is a Tanuka Daya, a changeling, who is a servant and squire to Hakatri of the leading house of Azua, which in 1,000 years or so will be the Hayholt. Hakatri and Pamonkes have been in search for some kind of curative or at least pain-easing something to help Hakatri, who of course was burned by dragon's blood back at the beginning of the book, while on Sesuadra, to which Hakatri was drawn, where he had a very odd interaction, which Pamonkes, in part because of his now connection to Hakatri and partially because they were using a witness, had a very odd message sort of from somebody that neither of them recognized, but it was all about someday the day will come when you will have to do something. This figure was addressing Hakatri. And when Pamonkes came back, Hakatri was insensible, unconscious, we would say now. And Pamonkes managed to get him to Enki-e Shausaya, which is the closest Scythi city, and they have been taken in there by Lord Protector Minasau and his mother, who is named, God, it's a complicated name. What is her name? Sunayata, Lady Sunayata. And they have questioned him about various things, including the strange happenings on Sesuadra, otherwise known as the Leave-Taking Stone, or, to readers of my books, more familiar as the Stone of Farewell. One of the things that always happens in my books, because I try to treat languages as they are really treated in the real world, is that things wind up with multiple names depending on which culture is talking about them. I'm sure that's confusing as hell for readers, and I apologize, but it's part of my commitment to what I consider to be realism. As much realism as you can have in a fantasy novel anyway. Okay, so that's what was happening, and I am going to now continue reading with Brothers of the Wind. And anybody I haven't had a chance to say hello to, I apologize, but I know you're there and I value your presence. Anyway, Lord Hakatri was either asleep or barely awake for several days afterward. The healers, bustled in and out of his chamber, dutiful as parents, but one of them confessed quietly to me that they could do little but tend to his comfort, because the curse of dragon's blood was so seldom seen these days. My explanation of what had happened on Sesuadra, leaving out the actual things that Hakatri and the mysterious presence had said to each other, because I would not breach my master's confidence, only puzzled and disturbed them. Sesuadra is known as a very dangerous place to use a witness, one of the healers told me. I cannot imagine how much more dangerous for one so badly burned by worm's blood. Despite my master's hopes, what he experienced on the leave-taking stone did not seem to have helped him, and might even have made his problems worse. I chided myself for standing by and letting him risk such harm, but in all truth I still cannot imagine what else I could have done, short of trying to drag him away from the place by force, which would likely have ended with one of us badly hurt or even dead. I had never forgot awakening to find my master caught up in night visions, swinging his deadly sword at dream enemies. When Hakatri finally awakened in full and had drunk deeply from the water pitcher, like a man who had been crawling through a barren desert for days, I asked him what he remembered of Sesuadra. Only a little, he told me, blinking his eyes as though the light in the dim room hurt them. And much. I must have frowned, because he said, "Do not look so unhappy, loyal Pamon. I am not playing games with words. I am trying to tell you the truth as I recall it." I did my best to clear my face of all expression, as though I were one of my master's own folk. I am listening, my lord. When I looked in the witness, I fell into it, or so it seemed. I saw 100 Hakatris, 1,000. I saw myself in all directions, a world made only of my own reflections. That was nothing like my own vision, and I wondered whether I should tell him about it, but I held my tongue. That was the closest to lying to my master I would ever come, and I still agonize over it. 1,000 Hakatris? I asked. Who knows, perhaps more. Countless reflections of my own face, but each slightly different. And then a voice spoke to me, a woman's voice I did not know. It told me that a day was coming, or a time 1,000 years in the future, or the time might not come at all, and that in that time to come I would be forced to a choice. And as it spoke, I saw all those shadows of myself, moving, speaking, living, each separate, each with a life of its own, but none of them had anything to do with me, except that somehow they were all me. The female voice at least seemed the same as what I had heard, but I still did not tell him my story. I did not want to admit that I had been privy to my master's innermost thoughts in the Kosajika. It seemed like a breach of his trust at a time of his greatest vulnerability, and I feared he would feel betrayed. This is very hard to understand, master. I find it so too, he said. But whoever or whatever spoke to me offered me no cure for my suffering or even respite. It only told me, suffering is. Then it was a bad oracle, my lord. About this I felt certain. How could anyone, mortal or immortal, see my master's torment and ignore it, much less dismiss it so callously? No, Pamon, I do not think there is either good or bad to be learned from the wisdom of the earth drake's eye. He winced as he changed position in the bed. I do not say that its every word must be obeyed or even believed, but I think such a power can only show us truth. What is left is a question of how much truth, and of what truth was not shown. Such fine distinctions were beyond me. I only want to see you well, Lord Hakatri. I do not think you should brood over long on this. My master smiled, but it was such a sorrowful expression that it made my heart ache. And what should I brood about instead, good Pamon? The family I cannot touch, the little daughter who fears me, my unending pain? He shook his head. That doom the voice foretold, the fate it believes hangs over me, at least has the virtue of waiting for me in some future time. I think I prefer that to anything I am living through now. Lord Hakatri soon sank into another long fever. I attended him every day, though he seldom realized I was there. But even when I left him to fall into an exhausted sleep of my own, it felt as if I still attended him. So much did my own dreams seem to be ruled by my masters. Once I even asked one of the Enkiei Shaosaya healers, a female Zedaya, whose name I no longer remember, whether being so close to Hakatri touched her dreams as well, and she seemed frankly astonished. "You dream his dreams?" she asked me. "How should I know? But I never dreamed of burning before the dragon's blood burned him, and I never wandered so far on the road of dreams either. On Sesuadra I heard—" I stopped myself then. If I could not admit to my own master that I had overheard his crossroads visions, how could I share it with a stranger? "In my dreams I shout names I do not know," I said instead, "as if I have seen old friends who cannot quite hear me, or old enemies I must fight who are always beyond my reach." The healer looked puzzled, but said at last, "Perhaps it is in your blood." "My blood? But I am not the one who fought the worm. I am not scarred by the black ooze that sprang from its wicked heart when it died." "You are Tenukadaya, are you not? One of the vow out of the garden?" Again my heritage was thrown at me. "What of it?" "Your people are strange in that way," was all she said, "alive to the dream road." Because of my master's slow return to anything like health, we stayed in the summer city as several moons slipped past. By the time the fox moon was waxing, I was beginning to feel that I had been stolen out of my own life. Even as I write this, I am ashamed to have been so selfish, but I must confess that I wondered many times if the folk back at Azua still remembered me, or if they thought only of Hakatri. I wondered also if my friends at Ravensperch talked of me from time to time. As the days sped past, I considered the marks my own life had left, and was overwhelmed by how little difference I had made in the world, except to my master. I was a nullity, something that only existed where my life touched the lives of more important folk. With my master being ably cared for in Golden Leaf House, I wandered the summer city, exploring its ancient gardens and the forest. I talked to some of the folk I encountered, both my master's kind and my own, and soon learned that I had not been wrong. Many of its inhabitants had already left Enkiei Shaoseye. The trade routes on the eastern side of Old Heart Forest had fallen out of use since Tumetai was abandoned. The remaining Zedaya settlements in that part of the world were too small to make up for the disappearance of that once great city of the north beneath the encroaching ice. Many I spoke with confessed that they too would likely leave soon for Azua or Mezutua or some other easier place to live. I had known little of the summer city before our arrival, but after spending so much time there, I had begun to mourn it like a beloved elder who is soon to die. Again, Ineluki's gloomy predictions came to me. If the Zedaya faded away, I could not help wondering, would my people finally be free, or would we fade with the immortals we served? On one of the days when I had been out walking in the city, I returned to my master's chamber to discover he was still sleeping, but the protector, Minasau Redwing, was sitting at his bedside. By the reckoning of the Zendaya, Minasao was young for his responsibilities. He looked to be in the first bloom of youth, though, as with my master, I knew he was older than his appearance. But the look on his face as I entered was not that of a carefree youth, but of someone bowed beneath worries. "Hakatri has not awakened in all the time I have waited here today," he told me. I gently set my hand against my master's forehead, which was warm but not fevered. "That is often the case, my lord," I said. "Sometimes the pain is so grave that he can do nothing but sleep. And in fact, at those times, sleep is a welcome escape." I hesitated. "But for his dreams." "I have heard something about this from the healers," he said. "Tell me about these dreams." "If they can even be called that." I offered Minasao refreshment, and he accepted a cup of wine. As he drank, still watching my master, I described the strange things that Hakatri had seen and felt since the dragon's death, the bizarre journeys he described to me on waking. "So these dire dreams began even before you climbed Seswadra?" "Long before. Almost from the moment my master was first splashed with Hirohebi's heart blood, though they changed after our night on the sea with the false healer Fenyona. But they were always more than just dreams. He has sworn to me that he floats helplessly from the past to future days and back again. Not even the wisest of our elders truly understands the road of dreams," Minasao acknowledged. "But what do you mean past and future?" "I know only what my master tells me, my lord, but there have been many times when he was certain he witnessed events yet to happen." I hesitated. "Once he saw ruins where this place, Enkie Shahosie, stands, broken stones that the trees and brambles had all but swallowed. Other times, he said he spoke to mortals who remembered the Zendaya people only as an old story. Was that simply fever madness? How could he speak to people still unborn?" Minasao shook his head. "If he saw our city in ruins, I fear he saw the future in truth, or at least one likely future. Jacoya herself, the great gatherer of the garden, once said that what is to come might extend before us like a road with many branchings, and each time you or I choose one direction, a ghost of ourselves takes the other one." "A ghost?" I did not like the sound of that. A spirit of the dead? Ghosts were a thing that mortals believed, but I had never heard it from a Zendaya before. "Not precisely. I doubt such a twin of ourselves, if Jacoya spoke rightly, thinks of itself as a ghost. That Minasao, or that Hakatri, or even that Armiger Pamon, would be oblivious to its twin. It continues with the only life it has ever known and thinks itself the real one, just as we all do on our own journeys." I could make no sense of this. In fact, the idea made me a bit queasy. "So we all have a twin?" Minasao smiled. "Not merely one. Hundreds, if you take Jacoya's idea as truth. Thousands. Every time we choose, the other choices are also made, and all those versions, all those twins, go forward from there." I could not help recalling my master's vision of a multitude of Hakatris, each living a life of its own, each separate but nearly the same as every other. That idea led to the sudden thought of thousands of Kes reflections, an army of them, all scattering in countless directions, choosing different courses and making different lives for themselves. This made my heart clutch in sudden unhappiness, and not only because those shadows would lead lives I could only dream of, lives of choice and freedom. I do not understand it, my lord. In truth, I find it painful to contemplate. Painful? He stood, perhaps having decided that he could wait no longer for my master to awake. Because it suggests there must be a mirror twin of Lord Hakatri, who did not stand against the dragon. My master had turned in his sleep and sloughed off the bedclothes. I looked down at the terrible scars on his belly and chest. That twin is hale and whole without pain, I said, because that twin's brother did not make a dreadful oath. Minasau nodded. Perhaps that is why your master sleeps so much. Perhaps in dreams he is trying to find another life where Inaluki did not swear that oath, a life where none of this happened. It was all too much for me to understand, and I told him so. Perhaps such thoughts should be left alone, he said. We have enough to worry about in our own world and time, and with our own Inaluki who did swear his oath, and who also seems to grow stranger and more desperate with each passing moon. Why this talk of my master's brother, Protector? Inaluki escaped without any wounds, unlike my master. In fact, my master and I have not even seen him for more than half a circle of seasons. Minasau looked down at sleeping Hakatri. Perhaps it is only me, Armiger. I have been thinking and worrying much about your lord's younger brother since the killing of the black worm. Now he turned back to me, startling me with the directness of his stare. Inaluki is angry. He is angry. He is angriest with himself, of course, but he is the sort that turns that fury outward as well as inward. I hear from friends in Azua that he rages every day about the mortals, though his mother, Amarasu, has made it clear she wants no threats against the short-lived herdsmen or any of their kind over Hakatri's wounding. She does not think what happened is their fault, but Inaluki's fire burns too hot to be so easily extinguished, and he has looked beyond Azua for those who share his anger. Beyond Azua? I was puzzled. Do you mean Lord Inazashi of Silverhome? His grudge against the mortal herdsman is ancient, but surely he and Inaluki— No, I do not mean Inazashi. I mean Nakiga. I mean Utuku Silver Mask, who calls herself the Queen of the Hikidaya. I was startled, but Minasau's words made new sense out of Inaluki's long absences when we guested in the deeps of Ur-Nakiga. But Lord Inaluki must know that the Queen of the North cannot be trusted, I said. His own mother and father have contested with her since long before he was born. Still, a fanatic heart will ignore what it does not want to know, said Minasau. It will excuse even that which cannot be excused in the need to find someone to share its bitterness. No, he is good, said a weak, raw voice. My master had awakened. Inaluki's spirit is good. Do not misjudge his hurt. Minasau kneeled beside the bed. It is good to hear you, Hakatri. Do not tire yourself. My brother loves me. Yes, said Minasau. Yes, he does. And that is one reason why he is so fierce, so desperate. Water, Pamon, said my master. I hurried to bring him a cup. He tried to take it from me, but his hands were trembling too badly, and he spilled more than he drank. I dreamed just now that time turned widdershins, he said as he wiped his chin with the back of a trembling hand. The sun rolled backward across the sky, west to east, and the years drained away, And all the time I thought I heard my brother crying out, "The three! The three will avenge us!" Minasao was shaking his head. "Leave those dreams behind, Hakatri, so that you may attend my words. It is time for you to go back to Aswa." My master looked at the Summer City's protector as though he had never seen him before. "What does this mean, Minasao? I can barely move. The dragon's blood still scourges my flesh every moment. I do not blame you for being tired of my useless presence. No, Hakatri, you mistake me. It is not that we wish you gone. Rather, my mother and I fear what your brother may do in your absence." This angered my master so that he tried to sit up, his face contorting with the anguish of his movements. I dared not touch him, but I wanted to hold him down because I knew that he would pay a steep price later for trying to raise himself now. "Even you must be careful how you speak of my brother, Minasao," Hakatri said through pain-clamped teeth. "You are my friend and kinsman, and your mother is beloved of my mother. But I cannot hear you speak about Inaluki this way." Minasao remained silent until my master gave up his futile attempt to rise and fell back, gasping with discomfort. "I am sorry, Hakatri," he said at last, "but a truth, even a fearful truth, must be told. I have waited until you were better to speak to you about it, but I can wait no longer. Your brother has become very close to Utuku's folk since your fight with the worm. Do you remember blind Jikio, the Hikidaya cleric, who attended you when you first came back to Aswa?" My master shook his head. "I remember little of that time. He is one of the highest of the Mountain Queen's lords of song, a magician of great skill." Hakatri gave out a strangled laugh. "Then his powers failed him, for he certainly brought me no cure. If that was his intent, he surely failed, yes, but perhaps he had other goals. As it is, I have learned that Jikio has gone back to Nakiga, alone." My master was grimacing with another tidal rush of pain, leaving it to me to ask the question. "Alone? What does that signify, Lord Protector?" "The other High Master of Utuku's Order of Song did not return with him, but remains in Aswa, and is constantly with Inaluki," Minasao said. "Her name is Omu. She is only a little less than Jikio in her abilities, but no less in her pride or ambition." "I saw her," I said, "many times, but she never speaks." "She speaks to Inaluki, it seems. They are always together these days." He now dropped his voice, which made me uneasy. Why should the heir of Golden Leaf Clan have to speak softly in his own house? "Those I know in Aswa say that Omu has become your brother's shadow, that she goes everywhere with him and whispers constantly into his ear. How can we not wonder what it is that she tells him? The words may come from Omu's lips, but do not doubt. They are Utuku's words and Utuku's thoughts. The queen of the Hikidaya hates the mortals even more than she despises those of us who do not agree with her, and she seems to have found an attentive listener in your brother." Minasao had caught my master's attention. "You may go now, Kes," Hakatri said abruptly. "You have no doubt been sitting with me a long time." I had not. I had only just arrived. But I understood he wanted to speak to Minasao privily, and in fact I had already heard more than I wanted to hear. Part 5. The Green Sea. Oh, actually, I don't think we're going to run too long tonight. We left Enki-e-Shaosie to return to Azua as the first crescent of the lynx moon crept into the night sky. My master was determined to ride, and he honored the horses we had brought out of the mortal lands by refusing the other steeds that Golden Leaf clan offered him. His Enki-e-Shaosie kinfolk would even have carried him home in a litter, had he wished, but my master did not want to return that way after such a long time apart from his people. He was determined to return in his own saddle or not at all. Such was his way, the way of all truly high and noble folk. We, who are less important, need think only of ourselves and sometimes of our families. But I have seen that the great ones, the high ones, are different. They know that the things they do and the way they appear while doing them are matters larger than themselves, the stuff of omens, the foundation of their people's fears and hopes. After so long away, Hakatri was determined to show a brave face to the folk of Azua. But, as I feared it might, his bravery cost him. Once we reached Azua, he had to be carried to his chamber in the palace, and for many days afterward he was prisoned in his bed. Ineluki came to see him that first day, and so did his parents. Ineluki was troubled to find his brother no better than when they had last been together, and even wearier than before, and I am certain that Amaterasu and Iunigato must have felt the same, but they all spoke only of their gladness at seeing him again, and their sorrow that he still struggled with the pain of his wounds. To my surprise and secret delight, a letter from Ravensperch was waiting for me when I arrived. I waited until my master was once more in the care of the Azua healers before I took myself aside and read it. To the Armiger Pamonkes, it began. We who live atop the beacon send our good wishes to you and your master. We hope that your travels were not too wearying or painful for either of you. We do not know when you will read this, but pray it will not be too long after we have sent it, since our news is nothing exciting even now while it is fresh, and will be even less so later. The we is, of course, the two of us, Lady Ona, who is writing this, and Lady Sholi, who has included her own message. As I sit here looking out my window, I of course cannot see Azua, but I often look to the east and think of you and your master. It almost seems as if that first visit you made to Ravensperch took place in another life, another world. That is one thing about living an exile life so far from the crowded places of the world. It sometimes seems as though time itself, a constant force against which all others strive like rowers fighting the tide, has passed this place by. Nothing changes but the seasons, and even those, it is now winter here, seem like pale, uninspired recreations of a more wholehearted past. Forgive me, Kess, if my words are less than inspiring. I have been unwell of late, but I am improving, and with better health I think my mood will also rise. Little has happened here of late in Ravensperch, and I have not the skill or the wit to make a great poem out of the ordinary days that have passed. In truth, I confess that I write this largely in the hope that you will tell us, in return, something of the wonders you must have seen among the mortals of the Southlands, where you said you were bound. Are the mortals there small, almost dwarfish in stature, as they say of the troll folk in the frozen north? I have also been told that huge hungry lizards called cockandrills live in the southern marshlands. Did you see any? And, more importantly, did you learn anything in your travels that has brought your master some relief from his afflictions? Please write to us if you are able, Kess. Surely some of the mortal men who visit Azua must travel back toward these lands and could carry a message for you? Or, I hardly dare ask it, might you again come to visit us here atop our tall, lonely beacon? For the days hang heavily here. I do not say this to complain about my husband. I knew his ways, his pains, and what our life would be when we married. I confess, though, that I did not realize how small our company would be here, or how few diversions there would be to make the days pass. Sholey and I find each day much the same as the one before. I walk often on the rooftops. Sholey reads. Of late she has spent many hours studying the words of our people's ancient bard, Tahinde, whose poem she has lately discovered. Looking at what I have written here, I see clearly that I have done nothing in this missive but complain. And what is worse, I have made you a tool of our salvation. No one should have to bear up beneath such a burden, especially a spirit as unassuming as yours, dear Kess. And now, having spoken again of Sholey, I should leave you to discover what she chooses to send along. I assure you I will be happier on another day, and will write a more agreeable letter then. It could be you will even read that one first, and never dream I could be as tiresome as I have been here. She ended the letter on that abrupt note, closing it with, Your friend. Underneath it she had signed her full name in fine, careful curlicues, Lady Saruyan Ona, Mistress of Ravensperch, as though she wished to put off sealing the letter. I opened the missive from Sholey that had been folded inside Ona's. To my surprise, the parchment was blank, its only contents a single white blossom, pressed and dried, the flower of a hawthorn tree. I stared at it for no little time, trying to understand. Lady Ona had written of Sholey's sending, so the dried bloom had not been included by accident, or merely because it was close by when Ona finished her letter. I was puzzled, and even a little disappointed. I had hoped to at least hear some words of friendship or regard from Sholey after so long, but instead she had sent only the desiccated remains of a flower that must have been picked during the previous year's nightingale moon. I asked some of my master's healers about hawthorn blossoms, and was given a long, thorough lesson in its use against many illnesses, from catarrh of the chest to heart pains and even disorders of the liver. But I could not think of any reason for Lady Sholey to be concerned for the health of my inner organs. I read the letter again and saw that Lady Ona had mentioned a poet Sholey had been studying, Tahinde, a name I did not know. I was about to ask some of Azua's fabled scholars and chroniclers about it, until one of the older Tanukadaya grooms pointed out that it was a vow name, so I should ask among our own people, not the Zidaya. I felt more than a little foolish that I had not realized this, but I had been very busy tending my ailing master. Young Nali Yun overheard this conversation and said, You should speak to my great-gran. She's a healer, too, or she was before she came here, and she knows books and many other things. In the old days, our folk called her Vala Dai, wise woman. I had not heard this before, though I knew old Nali Pina tolerably well. Most of the Tanukadaya in Azua knew each other, at least those bound to the lords and ladies of House Saonsere. Is that true? I asked. I have never heard her called that. He shook his head in disgust. Sometimes you don't even seem to know your own kind, Kess. I was beginning to think he was right. Tahinde, said the old woman when I went to her, and gently clapped her hands. I have not heard that name in many years. Back in Sunday Tuesday, he was called by many the voice of the dreaming sea. He was a great maker of songs, especially songs about our people's story in the garden and afterward in exile. Nali Pina lived with the rest of Nali Yun's large family in what was called the servants' hall, a warren of chambers that crouched beside the visitors' court of Azwa. She was likely the oldest living Tanukadaya in the city, wizened as a dried apple, the white hair on her head so thin that I could see much of her scalp, but her wits were nimble enough. This only pointed up the distance between Lord Hakatri's people and my own. My master's mother, Lady Amarasu, must have been 20 times Nali Pina's age, but showed none of the same outward signs of decline. "Tell me what this flower means," I begged her. "It depends on who sent it to you, and when," she said, showing her few remaining teeth in a teasing grin. "It is known to be dangerous to bring hawthorn into the house during the nightingale moon. If an enemy sent this, they might mean to wish you bad luck." I shook my head, though even the merest idea that the ladies of Ravensperch might have purposefully sent me a symbol of ill fate made me queasy. "It is not an enemy who sent it," I said firmly. "It comes from a woman of the Tanukadaya, and I have believed her to be a friend." She gave me a look that I swear was mostly amusement. "Ah, but that shows that you, like so many others in these sad days, do not know Tahinde's poetry." "You know I do not. That is why I came to you, grandmother." Among the Tanukadaya, all are considered part of the same family. Every old person is a grandfather or grandmother to the young, whether they share blood or not. She nodded. "And you were right to do so. I am likely one of the few of our kind here in Azwa who can guess at the meaning. Another part of our history all but lost." She shook her head, frowning, but did not say anything else for so long that it was all I could do to stay silent. "If this friend of yours has been reading Tahinde," she said at last, "then I think it most likely the flower is meant to speak of his song, the haw twig." "Recite the song to me, then, if you please." "Do you think I carry all the poems and stories that ever were in my head?" She swatted gently at me, as though I were a troublesome child. "I am not the voice of the dreaming sea, Armiger. I am just an old vow woman who wants her dinner. But once all our folk knew his songs, and I can remember at least the lines I think you would want to know. But do you speak your people's tongue?" Again my ignorance turned to bite me. "I do not." "I will try to put it in Zidaya words, then, but it will be a poor copy of the original." She leaned back and closed her eyes, taking so long that I was half certain she had fallen asleep. At last, after an agonizing pause, she lifted her cracked voice and sang, "Forever floating in the dream we share, I dreamed a path, I dreamed a woman, and as she went I could not catch her, because she would not be caught unless by her own will, and as she ran lightly, lithely, she let drop a haw twig on the path before me. It had buds like stars and barbs like spears, and these words she called back to me: 'If you pass it by, you will not be pierced, you will not suffer pain, no blood will flow from thorn's sharp point, but neither will you know the sweetness of its scent.'" I waited to see if she had finished, thinking there must be more. But what does it mean? I finally asked. Nalipina shook her head. You are a good person, Pamonkes, and a hard worker. But I suspect you are also a bit of a fool. By now I was almost beyond shame at having my failings discussed. So I have been told, over and over. But what does this bit of poetry mean? Why a hawthorn flower? Come now, it is there to be heard in the song if you have ears, she said. The hawthorn flower signifies affection and fidelity. Even the mortals know that. What it means is that someone has made you an offer. If you accept it, you risk what all lovers risk, pain and heartache, because love does not always go smoothly. And if you let the haw twig lie, for fear of thorns, you will not be hurt, but neither will you smell its fragrance. But I am not escaping pain, I thought, because this itself is painful. The old woman's words resurrected the earlier hurt I had tried to bury. Whatever we might think of each other, Sholey and I were both caught in webs of duty, separated by our loyalties to others, my master, her mistress, and I had believed we agreed on this sad truth when we first met. Now she seemed to be telling me that I had misunderstood, that she was still waiting to hear what my feelings were. And so I despaired. How could I answer her hawthorn blossom? What could I say? I was sworn to serve my master Hakatri, who needed me now more than ever. Why would she set me a cruel task that I could only fail? I stumbled out of the servants' hall without thanking Nalipina, full of pain and muddled thoughts. I wondered whether I had given Lady Sholey some encouragement that I could not remember or had not recognized. Could I have unwittingly made some promise to her? If I had, she seemed to have believed it. And what was more, and far stranger too, she seemed to have welcomed this misperceived affection, this unintended vow. How could that be? How could a clever and comely lady of good family, used to fine things and the company of high folk like Ona and Zaniko, favor a mere servant like Pamonkes with the dirt of the stables beneath his fingernails? I could not even feel flattered. The weight of someone's affections, especially someone as admirable as Sholey, felt like an unsupportable burden. I was already carrying so much. I immediately wrote a reply, though I confess my hands trembled more than they should have. I thanked Lady Ona and told her that Hakatri and I had only lately arrived back at Azua after a long journey. I related a little of what we had seen and experienced, as well as the sad truth that we had found no cure for my master's suffering. I wrote of Sholey's gift only to acknowledge it with gratitude, but I dared not presume on Nalipina's learning enough to say more about it, let alone how it made me feel. But as I finished, I saw that I had spoken of Sholey too little, so I added at the end of my missive that I held both ladies in the very highest regard. I asked Lady Ona to please give her friend my best wishes and to thank her for the kindness of her gift. Then I took the letter to the post-rider's hall near the stable and left it for the next rider, who could carry it on its journey west. That night, with my master sleeping, I agonized again over the letter I had written. It was graceless, I feared, and it said nothing useful. Several times I almost got up and claimed it back. What right did I have even to think of my own happiness in any case? Azua's healers had exhausted their knowledge and medicaments, and my master was already beginning to talk about another journey in search of new help. Could I expect a lady like Sholey to trudge around the world with me, to put up with the filth of the mortal cities or the hardships of swamps and forests? And even if Lord Hakatri decided to stay in Azua, for us to be together, Sholi would have to leave her beloved friend Lady Ona behind in that lonely castle of exile, with only her bitter, burned husband for company. It all seemed impossible, though I agonized over it through many long nights. So at last I put it from my mind as best I could and fixed my attention on trying to help my master. The circle of seasons continued, of course. The moon spirits chased one another, each swallowing the one that had gone before. The season of growth passed, then gathering, with Lord Hakatri still showing no signs of true improvement and his spirit sinking even lower. The letter I had written to Ravensperch had gone on its way long before, but it drew no reply. My master had not mounted a horse since coming back from Enkié Shausea, so I had little work to do in the stable, and I spent days upon days at his side instead, waiting for his infrequent moments of wakefulness. But when he was awake, he hardly seemed to notice me, his mind so full of dreams and ghosts that the true world around him must have seemed only another realm of fogs and shadows. He had rallied for a while, but now he seemed to be sinking again. As for me, I was waiting, but I could not guess what I waited for. And I think even though it's a few minutes early, I'm actually going to stop there. I'll read a few minutes more. Yeah, I'll read a few minutes more. That's okay, and we'll still have a decent chunk for next time. Almost 2 full circles of seasons had passed since Lord Hakatri had been burned by the worm's blood. And because they saw him so little, his family and the people of Azua mourned for him almost as if he had died. Still, life in the great city continued, and not just the season circle, but the great year of the garden-born was almost ended as well. The arrival of the rooster moon meant that only a short time remained until the year torch would appear and set the sky alight, proclaiming the arrival of a new great year. That sacred moment came only once in every 60 or so of the season circles that mortals called a year, and preparations for the year-dancing celebration had been underway in Azua for a long time, so the city was full of anticipation. Even though the Zediah live longer than my folk, and much, much longer than mortal men, the changing of a great year is an important occasion, especially in Azua. Deep in mirror-lit caverns beneath Azua, the Witchwood Grove where the ceremonies would take place was made as tidy as the throne hall, and special flowers were planted between the ancient silver-gray trunks. The trees themselves were ritually trimmed with white weave vines and festooned with silken ribbons of many colors, like ancient relatives dressed in their finest garments for a feast. Soon the Saansara herself would begin the sacred rituals to welcome the new great year. But I could not enter too much into the spirit of celebration. As the time of change advanced on us, Hakatri's dreams began to overspill his tortured sleep once more and wash into my own. And what had been a trickle as we crossed the whisper waste now increased manyfold, until scarcely a night passed for me when I was not captured by some powerful, often painful dream that did not seem to be my own. I ran beneath alien skies, chased by things I could hear but not see. I writhed in the grip of agony I could not escape. Sometimes I was myself, but with my master's afflictions, my skin afire, my bones smoldering inside me like hot coals. Other times I felt that I was Hakatri, that I could see the ancient history of my bloodline stretching behind me, but could discern only phantoms ahead, as though the entire heritage of the Zediah would fail because of my weakness. At such moments a deep, overwhelming fear seized me, but it also seemed that nothing I could do would make things better. The mistakes had already been made, or so the dreams seemed to suggest, the wrong turns taken, and I was lost beyond salvation. Strangest and most frightening of all, though, were the dreams I had about Ozawa itself. Whether they sprang from my master's imaginings or my own growing fears, I could not tell, but they were truly terrible. I dreamed of our ancient home in flames, of dark, distorted shapes running through the halls, and of blood dripping down marble stairs. I heard frightful screams and cries for help, all in the Zidaya tongue. Over it all I saw again and again a shadow wearing the ancient birch-bark crown of Ozawa's protectors, with branches that spread from it like the antlers of a stag. I dreamed that a ghastly horned shadow sat in the protector's chair, but the Sansara's chair beside it was empty, and the sky beyond the high windows was tinged with the red light of fire. "Jingizu," a voice said, echoing through those Ozawa dreams, a voice that hissed like the black worm, but that I could almost recognize. "Sorrow." And that's where I'm going to stop. Well, let's mark that, and then I will finish the book tomorrow night, I'm pretty sure. All righty, so I hope we were still on board. I hope that we hung on to everybody. Good, glad to see it. And so with that, I am going, where's the bookmark? I bookmarked it. There it is. Oh, wait. Oh, I see. I marked it twice. Oh, well. Anyway, so with that, I am going to hang it up for the night. I will continue at 7 tomorrow, and we will finish up Brothers of the Wind, and we will find the resolution to many of the questions. And I will also tell you that when Navigator's Children finally appears, many of the things that are not explained or resolved in the end of just not the important stuff about Pamon Kez and his story, that will wrap up in the end of Brothers of the Wind. But some of the other unexplained things, including characters' relationships to other characters, etc., will be explained in Navigator's Children. So it all kind of ties together in a timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly sort of way. Anyway, so with that, I will say thank you for joining me. As always, your presence is what turns this from a crazy person sitting in his office by himself in the middle of the night, talking to himself, into a cooperative experience. And that, in fact, is what writing is all about. You can write, but if you don't have anybody reading it on the other end, you are talking to yourself. So I am, as always, extremely grateful for readers and listeners, and in this case, you being listeners and readers both, in a sense. And with that, I say, take good care of yourselves, take good care of your loved ones, friends, and neighbors. We will all strive to take care of each other, and that way we have a better chance of getting through this thing called life, brothers and sisters. So with that, I say peace. Thank you for joining me, and have a good day. And I will see you all, or at least I'll see whoever of you join me, at 7 p.m. later today. Bye.